Hey guys, it's Austin here with Out Jeeping, and in today's video, it's going to be the start to the 3-inch lift series that I'm doing on this 99 Jeep Cherokee XJ. Today we're going to be replacing the old track bar with a Rough Country Forge adjustable track bar and bracket. So let's get started. So today I'm lucky enough to be able to use my boss's shop, which has heat. Since it is like -12 Fahrenheit outside right now, it's going to be cold for the next couple weeks here in Wisconsin. And I'm also lucky enough that he has a lift, so it's going to make it a lot easier. So let's get this thing up in the air. Alright, so looking underneath the front end of the Jeep here, this is a solid axle Dana 30 with coil springs up front. So we got one track bar right here, and the rear has a leaf sprung suspension, and we do not have a track bar. There is some leaf spring suspension that does come with a track bar, but for this Cherokee it doesn't have one in the rear. So we're just going to be replacing the front one today, and that is going to be this bar right here. It connects down over here in the passenger side axle and then goes up to the bracket, and this bracket bolts up to the frame. So to start off with the lift series, I'm going to start off with the track bar since it's pretty easy to do and you don't need to install all your lift components to do it, since this is adjustable from 0 to 6 inches of lift. And so this should be pretty straightforward on removing this. All we got to do is remove this bolt down here on the axle, and instead of disconnecting it between the bracket and the track bar, I'm just going to remove it all in one piece, so that way I don't have to deal with this bolt up here, because most likely it's going to be hard to get at and that cotter pin is going to be pretty rusted. So I'm just going to unbolt the bracket from the frame, and that's held in by 4 bolts. Alright, so this is what our new track bar setup consists of by Rough Country. Right here we have our nice forged heavy duty track bar, and it comes with an adjustable collar over here, so that way we can get our axle centered underneath the vehicle nicely. It also has some nice heavy duty high strength threads in there, along with a couple clamps so we can clamp that collar down whenever we have this adjusted. Along with that, we have some new hardware for both ends of the track bar, since they are going to be a little bit different holes. Along with that, we have our new track bar bracket that we're going to be installing on the frame, and we're going to be reusing the hardware from the old bracket onto this. Now this track bar setup right here does not have Heim joints, so it's going to be a lot easier for adjusting this. All we have to do is adjust this collar right here. We don't have to take off the end, spin it around, re-bolt it, and check it. It's going to be a lot easier. All we have to do is turn one way, and it's going to shorten our rod, and then turn the other way, and it's going to lengthen it. And wherever we need it, we'll just clamp it down, and then it should hold our adjustment. And then it also has rubber bushings on either end, so once we get our track bar installed, we're going to put the full weight of the vehicle back on there at the end, and then we'll tighten it up so that way we don't have any premature wear on our bushings. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is remove it over here on the axle side, and this is a 15mm bolt that goes through this bushing, and then it connects back here where we have a flag nut, and this is basically going to hold it in place so that way we don't have to get a wrench in the backside. But since this is probably the original track bar, and there's over 300,000 miles on this Jeep, it's most likely going to be pretty rusted. So what I'm going to do is actually take a torch, heat up this nut inside this little axis hole right here, so hopefully that breaks free of that rust bond, and then we're going to try and impact this off. Ooh, that broke. Alright, so I had a feeling this might break since it's happened on other Jeeps I've had. So good thing I got a cutoff wheel. We're going to try and sneak in behind here and cut the rest of this bolt off, and then we should be able to fish the rest out and then pry out this track bar from this bracket over here. We don't have to cut on the front side here because obviously that just snapped, so we'll just do one cut inside there. Alright, so I went ahead and finished that cut with the Sawzall. I don't have any new cutoff wheels, so I wasn't able to get all the way up in here. But that bolt would have never came out because, as you can see, that bolt is just seized inside of this bushing in the old track bar. But once I got that cut, it just dropped right down. Then we just got our little flag nut that's back here, so we'll fish that out of this hole. It is a little bit harder since we got that remainder of the bolt still kind of stuck in there, so it's not going to fit through here nicely. So we're just going to try and fish this out the best we can. Alright, so that's what that looks like. As you can see, that was a little bit harder to get out since we still had some of that bolt in there. It's a little bit thicker, but I just got in there with the vice grips, kind of bent it around a little bit and was able to fish it out. So that's it for this side. Let's go and start removing the bracket over here on the driver's side. All right, so to give us a little bit more space to work, I'm going to go and remove the driver's side wheel. All right, so over here on the driver's side, once again, we got 4 bolts holding in that track bar bracket. And there's actually just going to be 2 nuts over here on the frame rail. And there's actually going to be a flag bolt style that's going to be coming through the other side. So it's going to keep those studs in place so that way you don't have to have a wrench on the back side. But just be aware, once you have those 2 nuts out, it could be possible that it could push through. So you might have to get on the back side and push it back into place when you're reinstalling it. So I'm going to remove these 2 nuts right here. They're 18 millimeter. It's going to be a little bit more difficult getting at this right one right here, just because this coil spring's in the way. If I were to do this entire lift kit, I could probably remove the coil springs and then do the track bar bracket, but I'm just doing the track bar today, so we're just going to try it best we can and get that nut out. Alright, so since I can only get the socket on an angle through here, I'm going to heat up the nut a little bit so that way it's not as much stress and I have less chance of stripping it out. Alright, so as you can see, oop, that's hot. As you can see, that flange bolt back here, it's a little bit loose, so just make sure it doesn't pop out. Now up here on the underside of the bracket, we got 2 18 millimeter bolts threading up into the frame. Once again, we don't have to worry about getting on the back side because they got a welded nut. Ooh, it's a lot of rust. Alright, so now with that last bolt out, this whole assembly should be loose. So we're just going to go to the right a little bit, get it off those studs, and then slowly fish this out. Alright, so here's a quick side-by-side comparison with the new track bar compared to the old one. They're both forged track bars, but the original one is only about 1 inch in diameter, and the new one is 1 1/4, so definitely a lot stronger there. And along with the bracket, this is all 1/4 inch construction compared to, I think this is 3/16. So let's get started on installing the new track bar setup. We're going to start with the track bar bracket first. Alright, so for putting in this new track bar, I'm going to start by just kind of going where it needs to go and kind of slipping these studs over here on the frame side. And once that's in, I'm going to take our 2 nuts and just kind of thread into place and have it hang there. And I just put a little bit of anti-seize on these threads since this was kind of a pain to get off, and if I have to take this off in the future, it's going to make it a lot easier. Just got to make sure it's torqued down properly when this is all said and done. Alright, so now we can take our 2 bolts going up straight into the frame rail and we can thread them in place. I can tell already I like this design better than the Rubicon Express, just because these holes are actually outside from inside the bracket here. On the Rubicon Express, they're inside this bracket and it was kind of hard to get to. Since you can't really get a socket on there, sometimes you have to get a wrench. And for this, it should be a lot easier tightening it down. Alright, so now I'm going to start tightening these up, kind of do it like how a wheel is. So just tighten all the bolts a little bit each at a time so that way it snugs up nicely against the frame, and that way it's over this way as far as possible and is going up as far as possible. And if you have a hard time getting at this back nut, you can fit an 18 millimeter wrench in here. Alright, so once the track bar bracket is fully nice and snug against the frame, we can finish tightening it up. In the instructions by Rough Country, they don't give a torque spec, but I'm just going to make sure it's nice and tight, maybe around 80 foot-pounds or so. Okay, so now we can install our new track bar. So the side over here that has the hump, you want that facing up, and it's going to go right over the differential here on the axle. I went off camera and lubed up all these threads right here with some anti-seize, so that way if I have to adjust this in the future, That way this won't be seized up. And I put a little bit of anti-seize in these bushing holes as well as the bolts that we're going to be installing on this. Alright, so once we get the track bar in there, we're just going to line up the hole with the bracket. And then we're going to take our bigger bolt in the kit, and we're going to take one washer and feed it through. And then on the back side, we just have a flange nut, and we can thread that in place. So now down here on the axle side, same thing. We want to make sure that this little end piece is kind of arched up, and since it's not going to be exactly lined up right now, we're going to take our collar, adjust it so where we can get that bolt in the hole so everything's bolted up, and then we'll adjust this when it's back on the ground. So rotating the collar up extends the bar, and once you get the hole lined up, we'll take our smaller bolt and feed it through the hole with a single washer on the outside. Now, a tricky part's going to be is we got to get this washer and lock nut on the back side through this little axis hole where we used to have a flag nut. So we're just going to try and figure it into the hole. And then take our nut and see if we can fit it on. Alright, so once we have that threaded in there, I'm just going to get the slack out of the bolt and get it to where it's just about to tighten. The bolt and the nut are going to be 11/16, so I'm going to snug this up. Alright, so once you feel it get tight, leave it. We're going to go and tighten up the other side, and then we'll drop this back on the ground to adjust our track bar. Alright, so I'm going to put the wheel back on over here, and we'll lower it down. Alright, so now that we got the Jeep back on the ground, we got the full weight of the Jeep on the front suspension, and now we can adjust our track bar so that way we can center the axle underneath the Jeep. And the way I like to do it, if you're doing it from home, you can just take a tape measure, find a place like along the frame rail that's equivalent on both sides, and go against the tire on the same tread on both sides. So that way you can get a precise measurement and dial it in, so that way both your measurements on each side are the exact same, and that way your front axle should be centered underneath the Jeep. You do want to make sure that your tires are facing straight. So if it's turned one way, it's going to give you inaccurate measurements, and you might be able to dial it in so that they're the same measurements, but it still won't be centered underneath the Jeep. So I'm going to find a place right here that's the same on both sides, and I'm just going to go to the outside tread. And right now I'm reading about 16.5 inches. On the other side I was measuring 17.25. So if your axle is shifted over and sticking out on the passenger side, that means your track bar is too long and you have to shorten it up a little bit. So we can do that by the collar underneath, and we're just going to keep adjusting and keep measuring until we get that dialed in. Now I am going to have to do this once again once I get the rest of the lift kit installed, but since today I'm still keeping it stock height, I still have to adjust it for driving around. Alright, so once again, to get this rod to shorten or lengthen, we're going to turn this. So with all the weight on the suspension, it's going to be a little bit harder, but you can have a helper kind of like shake the steering wheel, and it does actually make it a little bit easier to turn this collar. Unfortunately by myself, so I'm just going to have to struggle with this. Otherwise you can get a pipe wrench in here, and then it should go with ease. Alright, so I got my alignment just about perfect, and now is the time that we're going to tighten up the ends on the track bar. So over here, once again, 11/16. I'm going to fish in our box end wrench on the back side so that way it grabs onto that nut, and then we'll tighten it up. And over here, it's going to be a 3/4. Alright, so with the track bar bolts tightened up, the last thing we got to do is tighten up our 2 clamps over here on this collar, and that way it should keep the position of the axle centered underneath the Jeep. And these 2 bolts are going to be a 5/8. Alright, Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully you guys learned something on that. Overall, everything went pretty smooth except for that stubborn bolt that I had to cut out, but I knew that was probably going to happen since on multiple Jeeps I've had to cut out that bolt if it's never been touched before. But make sure you guys stay tuned for the upcoming episodes. We're going to lift this Jeep up 3 inches. We got a complete lift kit to put on this thing, so it's going to be fun doing it, and it's definitely going to transform the look of this Jeep. I want to thank Rough Country for sending me this track bar setup, as well as the other lift components that we're going to be installing here real soon. I'll post a link in the description on all the parts I used in this video. So if you guys like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel to help these videos keep coming. And if you guys have any questions or comments, make sure to post them below and I'll be happy to answer. If you guys want to support the channel, I got some Out Jeeping decals that you guys can purchase. I'll post a link in the description below for that as well. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.